And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Well, today's sea ice analysis showing ice forming now, expanding here from the central Arctic coast eastward into Mackenzie Bay. Also starting to see some ice showing up there to the north there, getting just south of the label here, northwest or north of the western Arctic coast here. This area out to the around Wrangel Island continuing to expand and extend southward toward the Bering Strait. And also Kotzebue Sound seeing an increase in the ice. And this pattern is going to continue probably for the next 5 to 7 days. For the low pressure tonight moves to close to St. Lawrence Island, so periods of snow there, and snow and gusty winds into the Seward Peninsula, eastern Norton Sound, the Lotto Hills area with some light snow pushing into the mid-Yukon River Valley, extending southward across the Kuskokwim Valley, reaching the western Alaska Range after midnight, and rain to the south here from northern Bristol Bay, Togiak area down across the Alaska Peninsula, drying out behind the front, and increasing clouds here over the eastern interior. Still a chance of light snow for the eastern Arctic coast, and variably cloudy with light winds for the southeast coast. And then for tomorrow, it'll be partly to mostly cloudy here for the Panhandle. Still some sunbreaks possible there with a risk of a shower along the coast, but just a very slight chance at that. Otherwise, this front bringing snow eastward here in across the interior, all the way over toward Eagle, southward into south central Alaska, some light snow in the Copper River Basin. That mixing with rain here across the Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound areas into southern Cook Inlet, and just rain for Kodiak Island. Behind the front, snow showers, and then as that low tracks up to the Seward Peninsula, snow continues there to St. Lawrence Island, and another trough will bring an increase in the snow to the southwest coast and the back island, maybe even the Pribilofs there for the afternoon hours, and then a break behind that. Next system out to the west, you can see a very intense low brings storm force winds from the Komodorskis into the Shemya 2 area Tuesday and Tuesday afternoon. Front extending eastward here, bringing wind and rain into the central Aleutians. Eastern Bering Sea looks pretty good here. High pressure, light winds, and clearing skies. Some snow showers from the north slope, chance of snow for the Arctic coast. Another intense low here into the southern Gulf of Alaska. That's going to bring gale and storm force winds, especially in advance of the front here. Those high wind watches for the coastal areas of the Panhandle for gusts over 60 miles per hour. And for the coastal water forecast tomorrow for the southern southeast coast on the outer coastline, northwesterlies 15 to 20 knots. Variable winds 10 to 15 knots on the north or the central coast, and the north coast east winds 15 knots, or 15 to 20 knots there. North 20 for Lynn Canal and Stevens Passage. North winds 15 knots, Clarence Strait northwest at 15. And then we've got gale warnings for Clarence Strait on Tuesday. Southeast winds 40 knots, seas building to 11 feet, and good gales all along the coast here. 45 knots out of the east and southeast for the central and south coast. East 40 to 45 knots on the north coast. Lynn Canal, southeast winds 25 knots with higher gusts. And for Prince William Sound, east winds 20 knots. North Gulf Coast, east to southeast winds 25 knots. 25 knots southeast winds here for the Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay. East to northeast winds at 15 to 20 for Cook Inlet. And moving on to Tuesday, Cook Inlet, north to northwest winds 20 to 25 knots. Strong northwest gales here, 45 knot winds, Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands. Seas 13 to 15 feet. Gale warnings continue here for the eastern North Gulf Coast. Out of the north and northeast, 35 to 40 knots, and northeast at 20 knots for Prince William Sound. Kodiak Island, southwest winds 20 to 25 knots. Northeast at 15, or northwest at 15 knots for Bristol Bay. And for the Alaska Peninsula, north to northwest winds 20 to 25 knots. And then we've got gale warnings for the peninsula on Tuesday. West-northwest winds 30 to 40 knots, northwest 40 for Bristol Bay. Kodiak Island, gale warnings, northwest winds 35 to 40 knots. Eastern Aleutians tomorrow, small craft advisories, northwest winds 25 to 30 knots, west 20 to 25 knots for Adak and Atka. And then out to the west, we've got west to south winds at 20 to 35 knots. Then on Tuesday, storm force winds here pushing into at least, or probably no farther than Amchitka Island. Definitely back to the west here. Southwest winds, or south to southwest, 50 knots. Seas as high as 36 feet. Gale warnings ahead of the front there for Adak and Atka. South winds 45 knots. And then we've got south to southwest winds, 25 to 35 knots for the eastern Aleutians. For the southwest coast, St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound, southwest at 25 for the day tomorrow. Pribilof Islands, west winds at 35 knots and west winds at 30 knots for St. Matthew Island. Then St. Matthew Island, good gales on Tuesday, northeast at 40 knots, southwest 25 knots for the Pribilofs. Southwest coast here, northwest winds 25 to 30 knots and northwest at 25 for St. Lawrence Island. Up along the central and eastern Beaufort Sea coast, small craft advisories. East winds 25 knots, seas 5 feet. Gale warnings here for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow. East at 35 knots with seas up to 8 feet. Chukchi Sea, east to northeast, 25 to 30 knots. And then for the day Tuesday, lighter winds all areas. East winds at 15 to 20 knots for the eastern Arctic coast. Northeast at 15 for the central coast. Small craft advisories for the western coast. Northeast 25 to 30 knots in the Chukchi Sea. North to northeast at 20 to 25 knots. Oh boy.